And out of those 3 ingredients, one woman put a hot supper on the table for 6 children every single night for 30 years. And not one of them ever went to bed hungry. Picture it with me for just a second. A kitchen up a holler in East Tennessee. No electricity yet. A wood stove throwing the only light in the room. A pantry so small you could stand in the middle of it and touch every wall without stretching. That's where this whole list comes from. There are 20 suppers here, every single one built from 3 ingredients, sometimes a pinch of salt or a spoon of grease that nobody ever bothered to count. And the very last one, number 1, is the supper that ended up on nearly every table in these mountains during the hardest nights this region ever lived through. When we get there, I promise you it's going to stop you cold. So stay with me all the way to the end. We're going down to number 1. Number 20. Milk, gravy, and biscuits. Flour, bacon grease, milk. That's the whole dish. You brown the flour in hot grease until it turns the color of an old penny, and you'll hear it before you see it. That low sizzle that means it's ready to take the milk. Pour it in slow, stirring the whole time so it never lumps. Salt, a heavy hand of black pepper, and you pour it hot over a split biscuit until it soaks all the way through. This was breakfast for supper. On nights when the garden hadn't come in yet and the smokehouse was running thin, gravy and biscuits filled a table of hungry people for the cost of a cup of flour. Nobody called it comfort food. It was just Tuesday. Number 19. Soup beans. Dried pinto beans. A hunk of fatback. Water. Nothing else. You'd soak the beans overnight, then let them simmer on the back of the stove for most of a day, low and slow, until the whole house smelled like it by early afternoon. A warm, savory smell that meant supper was already handled no matter what else happened that day. In these mountains, soup beans weren't a side dish. They were the meal, ladled over cornbread, eaten almost every single day of the week by families who kept a pot going nearly year-round. If you grew up here, your grandmother had a bean pot that never fully emptied. She just kept adding to it. Number 18. Wilted lettuce. Fresh leaf lettuce, bacon grease, vinegar. Hot grease straight out of the skillet poured right over cold lettuce leaves, with a splash of vinegar stirred in behind it. You could hear it hiss the second it hit the bowl, and the leaves went soft and glossy in seconds, right there at the table, still warm on top and cool underneath. This was a spring dish, made the second the first lettuce came up in the garden, after a long winter of nothing green at all. And there's a real reason it mattered more than people realize. After months of stored food, that first bite of something fresh and sharp did something for the body as much as the spirit. Number 17. Fried mush. Cornmeal, water, salt. You'd boil the cornmeal into a thick mush the night before, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it set in the cold overnight until it turned firm enough to slice clean with a knife. In the morning, or if there was nothing else for supper, you'd slice it thick and fry it in a hot skillet until both sides turned dark and crisp, with a soft, steaming middle underneath the crust. 3 ingredients, a night of patience, and a supper that tasted like something far richer than cornmeal and water had any right to. Now here's something I want you to notice, because it's the first thread pulling this whole list together. Not one of those 4 suppers required a trip anywhere. The beans came from what was put up in the fall. The cornmeal came from corn ground at the mill down the creek. The grease was already sitting on the back of the stove. Nobody drove to a store for any of it. Hold on to that. Because in a few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what changed, and it wasn't the food that disappeared. It was something else entirely. Number 16. Fried apples, dried apples, butter, sugar. Apples that had been sliced thin and dried on a cloth over the stove all summer got soaked back to life in a little water, then cooked slow in butter with a spoon of sugar until they turned soft, dark and syrupy, filling the whole kitchen with a smell almost like a pie baking, even though nothing was in the oven at all. Come January, when Nothing green was left anywhere on the mountain. A skillet of fried apples was the closest thing to dessert most families saw all winter. Number 15. Streaked meat and gravy. Salt pork, flour, water. Thin strips of fatback fried crisp in their own grease, pulled out, and then a gravy built right in that same skillet from the drippings left behind. The meat went back in at the end, or got eaten on the side with cornbread to sop up what was left. This dish stretched a single piece of salted meat across a whole family's supper, sometimes across a whole week, cut a little thinner every time the jar ran low. Number 14. Shuck beans and cornbread. Dried leather breeches beans, water, salt. In late summer, whole strings of green beans were threaded onto twine with a needle and hung to dry along the porch rafters. Leather breeches, they called them. Come winter, you'd pull a string down, soak the beans, and simmer them for hours until they turned dark and tender, with a flavor nothing like a fresh green bean at all. Deeper, almost smoky, the kind of taste that only comes from time. Every porch in these hills used to have strings of them hanging by October. You'd be hard-pressed to find one today. Number 13. Buttermilk cornbread. Cornmeal, buttermilk, an egg if there was one to spare. Poured into a screaming hot, well-greased skillet, so the edges went dark and crackled the second the batter hit the iron. That sound alone was enough to bring children in from the yard. This wasn't a side dish either. A wedge of hot cornbread crumbled into a glass of cold buttermilk was a whole supper on its own, especially for the men coming in late from the field, too worn out to want anything that needed chewing for long. Number 12. Killed lettuce and green onions, leaf lettuce, bacon drippings, green onions pulled straight from the garden. Close cousin to wilted lettuce, but built around whatever green onions were up that week, chopped in raw for a sharp bite against the hot, greasy dressing. A garden supper, built entirely from what was standing outside the back door that evening. No plan, no list, just a walk out to see what was ready. Here's the second thing I need you to sit with, because it's the part that explains everything that happened after. Every single one of these suppers came off that family's own ground. The beans were their beans, the meat was their hog, the cornmeal was their corn. Nobody was shopping. Somebody was simply walking around the place they lived and gathering supper up off it. Then, across one single generation, that stopped. Not because the mountains changed, because of what the people living on them were told. And I'm going to explain exactly what that was, because it's the reason half these dishes vanished inside of 30 years. Through the middle of the last century, families across Appalachia heard the same message over and over from every agency and every catalogue that reached these hollers. A garden and a hog and a flock of hens were old-fashioned. The modern way, the better way, was to work for wages and buy your food at a store in town. And for a lot of families, wage work in the mines or the mills genuinely did mean more money in hand. That part was true. But something quieter happened at the same time. The garden got smaller. The hog pen went empty. And food that had always come from right outside the door started arriving on a truck instead. Grown somewhere else, sold back at a price, to people who used to grow it themselves for nothing at all. That's simply what happened, and it's exactly why the rest of this list nearly disappeared. Before we keep going, if any of this already feels like something that belongs back in your kitchen, scan the code on your screen right now. That's where the complete written list of all 20 suppers is waiting, with the exact amounts for each one, so you don't have to hold any of it in your memory later. Go ahead and grab it now, and then let's keep going, because the second half of this list is where it gets personal. Number 11. Pinto beans and fried potatoes. Pinto beans, potatoes, bacon grease. The beans from the pot that was already going, potatoes sliced and fried hard in the skillet until the bottoms went deep golden brown, and the two served side by side with cornbread. This was as close to an everyday Appalachian supper as it gets, the plate you'd find on nearly any table Any night, for generations. Number 10. Poke salad. Young pokeweed greens, bacon grease, an egg scrambled through at the end. Now, I have to stop and be straight with you here because this one matters. Pokeweed is toxic if it isn't handled exactly right. The greens must be picked young, in early spring only, and boiled and drained in fresh water at least twice before they're ever fried. Older leaves, the roots, and the berries are dangerous and should never be eaten. This was knowledge passed down hand to hand, generation to generation, and it was never something to guess at. If you don't already know this dish from someone who's made it themselves, it isn't one to learn from a video. It's one to learn from a person standing beside you. Number 9. Fried green tomatoes. Green tomatoes, cornmeal, bacon grease. Sliced thick, pressed through cornmeal, and dropped into a hot, popping skillet until the crust went dark gold, and the tomato inside stayed firm and tart, still holding its shape when you cut into it with a fork. Late in the season, when frost was coming, and there were still tomatoes on the vine that were never going to ripen in time, this was simply what you did with them. Not a recipe anyone wrote down, just a reflex, the same way you'd grab a coat off the hook. Whole families would go out at dusk before the first hard frost and strip every vine bare, because a green tomato left on the ground come morning was a tomato wasted. Number 8. Cracklin cornbread. Cornmeal, buttermilk, cracklins. Cracklins were the crisp bits of skin and fat left over from rendering lard. Nothing was ever wasted in these kitchens, and that included the byproduct of butchering day. Folded into cornbread batter, they turned an ordinary pan of bread into something rich and savory enough to be the whole supper on its own. Number 7. Chow chow over beans. A spoon of chow chow. The mixed vegetable relish put up every fall from the last of the garden, whatever was left over before the first frost took it, spooned over a plain bowl of beans and cornbread. This is worth pausing on because it's a real principle, not just a garnish. When everything on a plate is soft, plain, and filling, one bright, sharp, vinegary thing on the side changes the whole meal. It wakes every bite around it back up. Every mountain kitchen understood this instinctively, long before anyone ever gave it a name. I want you to think, just for a second, about how few ingredients we've talked about so far. Beans, cornmeal, grease, buttermilk, a handful of garden greens. That's nearly the entire list, rearranged over and over into a different supper every night of the week. Think about what that actually took. No 2 nights repeated the exact same way, because no 2 nights had the exact same beans in the pot or the exact same greens standing in the garden. That meant a woman was reading her own kitchen fresh every single evening. What was ripe? What was running low? What needed using before it turned? And building supper out of that reading without ever writing a word of it down. I need to stop you right there, though, because poor is the word people always reach for when they hear this list. And it's the wrong one. That was skill. That was a woman who knew exactly what she had and exactly what to do with it every single night, without a book in front of her. We've got 7 left. And I promise you, the last one is going to land harder than anything before it. Number 6. Apple stack cake. Dried apples, flour, sorghum. Thin layers of a stiff, barely sweet dough baked one at a time, then stacked with a filling of stewed dried apples between every layer, and left to sit for a day or two so the moisture from the filling soaked all the way through, until the layers went soft and the whole cake ate almost like a spice cake, dense and dark and fragrant. This wasn't an everyday dessert. It was a wedding cake, built by neighbors who each brought 1 layer to the celebration, so that the finished cake was really the whole community stacked together on 1 plate. Number 5. Sorghum and biscuit. A hot biscuit split open, butter melted into both halves, and sorghum molasses poured over the top until it pooled in the middle and ran down the sides. This was breakfast, and it was also what went into a dinner pail for a child heading off to school or a man heading off to the mine. Kime. Sugar cost real money. Sorghum came from a patch behind the house, cut and boiled down in a flat pan every fall, and there was a jug of it in nearly every kitchen in these mountains year-round. Number 4. Vinegar pie. Eggs, sugar, vinegar. This one sounds like a mistake the first time you hear it, and it is not. Lemons simply weren't something a family in these hollers could reliably get, especially in winter. But a pie needs something sharp in it, or it's just sweet and flat. So a couple of spoons of cider vinegar went into an egg and sugar custard instead. And baked. It comes out remarkably close to lemon. Close enough that a family who hadn't tasted a real lemon in a year was entirely satisfied by it. Number 3. Water pie. Water, flour, sugar. I promised you this one at the very start, and here it is. No fruit, no milk, no eggs, water poured into a pie shell with flour and sugar and a little butter, and it sets, genuinely sets, into a pale, wobbly, sweet custard. This was made on the day somebody was coming to visit, and there was nothing else in the house to offer them. A woman was not going to answer her own door with an empty table, so she made a pie out of water, and nobody outside that family was ever told what was actually in it. Number 2. Milk and cornbread. Cold buttermilk, cornbread, a green onion pulled straight from the ground. Cornbread crumbled into a tall glass, buttermilk poured over the top until it went soft, eaten with a long spoon standing at the counter, with a raw green onion eaten alongside in bites. This was the supper for the person who came in last, after dark, too tired to sit down for a full meal. And it filled a body up completely for the cost of almost nothing at all. And now, number 1, bean bread, cornmeal, cooked pinto beans, water. That's it. That's the entire dish. Leftover beans mashed right into cornmeal batter, a little of the bean liquid used instead of milk or buttermilk, and baked into a dense, hearty loaf that carried the whole flavor of a pot of beans inside a piece of bread. Heavier than regular cornbread, almost chewy, the kind of thing that sat with you for hours after. This is the supper that showed up in these mountains on the hardest winters anyone in this region ever lived through. When the mines shut down, when the roads washed out, when there was flour and cornmeal and beans in the house and genuinely nothing else. It stretched one pot of beans into 2 meals. It fed a family of 8 on ingredients that most people today wouldn't think to put in the same bowl. And here is the thing I want you to actually carry out of this video with you. That family was not poor in the way we use that word now. They had a garden, a hog, a flock of hens, a pantry lined with jars, and a family that ate every single day of their lives. They were fed, completely, reliably fed, on 3 ingredients, night after night, for generations. The difference between then and now was never about how much food was available. It was about whether you knew what to do with what you already had in front of you. And that's a kind of knowing that doesn't need electricity, or a full pantry, or even much money at all. It just needs somebody willing to look at 3 plain things sitting on a counter and see a whole supper hiding inside them. So here's what I want you to try. Just one. Tonight or tomorrow night. Look in your own kitchen before you make a list or drive anywhere. See what's already there. Beans, cornmeal, a little grease, a little buttermilk. And build supper backward from that, the way it was done in this exact list, for generations, without a single trip to a store. And if any one of these brought back a supper your own mother or grandmother used to make, one that never got written down anywhere, I want to hear it in the comments. Tell me the dish, and tell me who made it for you. The ones that come up most are the ones I'm covering next. Everything a mountain kitchen used to do with a crock, a smokehouse, and a single hog in the fall. If you want to be here the moment that one goes up, the same code that's on your screen right now will get you notified the second it's ready. No searching for it later, no missing it. We're bringing this kitchen back, one plate at a time.